Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to this month's Code Harbour. Way. Yeah, thanks for coming. Obviously, these are recorded. So let's get started. So our first talk is from Select Technologies digital transformation consultant Nick Ellis, who is going to be telling us about giving us 5 reasons why user testing isn't working. So away you go.
Thank you very much. Hopefully people can all see me and my screen now. I'll assume that that's the case unless Alex screams. Is our designated screen?
It's showing, but I've just realized it's not full screen for some reason. I don't know if you are actually screen sharing.
I am screen sharing. Are you seeing fireworks?
Yeah. Is anyone else having this problem with it? It's not full screen because it did with Allright, so I'm just wondering if there's something different.
I'm seeing the same. I just see the thumbnail, but if you click,
Yeah.
if you go to the top right hand corner and click speaker view, as long as Nick is the only one speaking, you will get him full screen then, because it also uses his camera. But yeah, he's not in presentation mode. It's because he's using OBS, I think.
I thought so. Okay, well, we'll do that then. So, yeah, mic's off, everyone.
Thank you for that. We'll live and learn. So since we're all staying inside, I thought I'd just start with some fireworks for people, since we're not actually out enjoying the fireworks. And in fact, I've just seen on the news that you will get fined by the police for having your own fireworks display, so don't do that. So this talk today is 5 reasons why user testing isn't failing, which came out of a conversation, as Alex was saying earlier, about developers and testing and what have you, and could I come along and do my thing. So here I am. Hopefully you'll find it interesting. What you won't do, I hope, is have any moments where you think, my God, that's absolutely the most revolutionary thing I've ever heard. That isn't the goal of this, and this is also not a technical talk. This is about how we manage testing in software deployments and how we manage it through projects. So yeah, as Alice was saying, I work for Select Technology, based up in wherever they're based. Can't remember, Paddockwood. It's been so long since I've been there. And yeah, but I live down in Sandwich, near just outside Sandwich. So my background, some of you may have seen me before. I've noticed that Glenn is on the attendee list. I don't know if you're here, Glenn. I'll try and say something about security. So, but my background is in managing software across businesses of various sizes, and principally from an operational perspective, but I've had quite a lot of involvement in projects as well. And that's what makes me feel that I have something of value to say. Hopefully by the end you'll agree. So testing, most people, when you talk about testing, this is the reaction that you get. You get people going, well, we don't really want to talk about that because it's boring. And I understand that. It's not the exciting code creation bit, nor is it the exciting getting somebody to sign a big check stage. It's the bit in between that you really should do. And I would ask you to consider, I'm going to make an assumption that everybody here is kind of in some way involved in something creative. I know there's a couple of marketing people, there's a lot of code type people, obviously, and I know there are some security and other sort of consultants. So, and I imagine a lot of you are sort of doing what this chap's doing, which is rolling your eyes and thinking, oh my God, testing. My question to you is, what are you paid for? And the answer you're going to give is probably producing software or securing environments or whatever that may be. And I would disagree with you, because I think what you're paid for is outcomes that benefit the business. And if you can't test and demonstrate those outcomes, what you've done is produced a great deal of code for what? It's not clear. So testing is important in terms of getting a product into production. It's important in terms of showing the value of what you do. If you're freelance, particularly, you're literally paid on the quality of what you produce. So testing is the way to demonstrate that, and it is also something that is often overlooked because of this expression here. So hopefully by the end of this, you'll be enthused. Now, the reasons that testing fail, I've said that there are 5 reasons why testing fail. Actually, underneath it, there are 3 reasons. One of them is emotion. This person here that you can see, she's got all sorts of emotions. It's a bit strange, but emotion is a key part of it. So what is it that gets your business stakeholders and your users actually excited? What turns them off? And also what will trigger an unexpected outburst of either joy or rage? And then another element to it is about perception. What do people think of the project? What do they think of the team? What do they think of the stakeholders? These are all things that make projects work or not work. What do people think is important and unimportant to their success? And I'm being quite specific there when I say their success. So I'm not asking what people think is important to the business success. I'm asking what they think is important to their success individually, because that has a huge impact on whether testing works or not. And I will come on to why in a bit. And then incentives. What do people get paid for? Fundamentally, because that will drive what they consider to be important in the project, and that will drive how they view the outcome of testing. So if people are incentivized in the wrong way, they will make testing harder for you in various ways as well. So this is all part of, I'm kind of pitching at business managers, I'm pitching at coders, I'm pitching at users. You're all going to be addressed here. The 5 reasons are all to do with people and roles and personalities, much more than they are kind of here's a test script. I'm not going to say here's a test script that you can use and it will solve everything. I have done that. If you want to pay a very reasonable daily rate, I can do that because it varies by customer. So this is a more general look at what are the main reasons, and I'm going to go through those now, really. So this is Alice. Alice is a company director, and as you can see, she's quite a sort of stressed-looking person, as directors often are. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce you to 5 people, 5 roles, and essentially I'm building a bit of a Keystone Cops. This is, I mean, if this team ever actually existed in the real world, it would be pretty horrific, I think it's safe to say. And I don't think I've ever encountered all of these in the same place, but I've certainly encountered each of them in some combination across my career. And they've all ended up causing problems at the end of a project where you're trying to get it signed off and closed. So Alice is the director of the business. And what she's interested in is value for money. And she's going to make an investment in some software, and she wants it to give her some value back in her business. So she defines that value in terms of productivity and reduced operating costs. In the early stages of the project, there's a very good chance she's going to talk about things like usability and making life easier for her team. That's nice, it's noise, it's unlikely that it's the primary driver, and a lot of people will say these things and not really mean it. So what she's really interested in is cost. She wants to know, is this going to reduce my costs overall? She wants to know about productivity. Is it going to increase the productivity of my team? And she wants to know about profitability. Is it going to increase the profit of my business? And those are likely to be the things that Alice is going to want to be testing. Now, sorry, I missed a step there. Apologies, I'm just going to go back. So with each of these, that emotion, perspective, incentive mix. So Alice's emotional thing is all about wanting the business to succeed and wanting to make an impact, and from her own ego, it's likely to be around being recognized as a leader. from a perspective issue, she's going to say something irrational and unachievable. It's a bit disappointing everyone's got their mics off, although I understand why. Because how many of you have heard comments like, well, Google can perform, Google's available all the time, or Facebook has much faster page loads than this. And yes, but they spend literally billions of dollars a year on their infrastructure. So, but that perspective of anything less than that is bad, is going to be very important in your testing later. And in terms of incentives, it's got income directly related to the business success or failure. So that's where the incentives and the responses are going to come from. This is Ben. You might notice that these people are A, B, C, D, and E. So this is Ben. Ben is a worker in the business, uses the software every day and knows how to do his job. And he has to work around a number of the issues in the thing that we're replacing, which is why we're replacing it in the first place. But those workaround works. There is no incentive for Ben around the project. So that's important. And the people who, very commonly the case, and I'm not suggesting that we should change that, but as project people and as developers and what have you, we should be aware of that. Usually the users of the software are the least financially and therefore emotionally connected to the project. So Ben's basic view is that he comes to work in order to pay for his life. Might be his career, might not. And he enjoys coming to work. His perspective is about the fact that he's spent 2 years getting his workarounds to work. So actually you coming along, his initial reaction is probably going to be go away. And his incentives, he's paid the least of everybody involved in the project and has very little vested interest in the outcome. So you have to consider that. There are ways to engage him and get him motivated and get him focused on the value of the testing. Acknowledging his high knowledge of the business requirement obviously is key. Acknowledging the value of his workarounds is also going to be enormously helpful. And the last thing, if those two don't work, biscuits. People will come to almost any meeting if there's going to be biscuits. That's basically the rule of the universe. Then we have Carla. Now, Carla is our business analyst. Her role is defining what the business does and specifically what the software should do to support that. Now, I'll say at this point, unless you're in a very large business, you're unlikely to have these 5 people as distinct people, right? It may well be that Ben is the person fulfilling Ben's role is also fulfilling Carla's role. What I've noticed is that people have a remarkable capacity to draw kind of Chinese walls within their brain and can have one opinion when they've got their I'm doing business analysis that is different to the opinion they have when they're actually doing the job. And it's something you need to keep an eye on. Similarly, the project manager, commonly project manager and business analyst overlap. And if you're completely freelance, you're probably all of business analyst and developer and project manager. But nonetheless, check your own thinking, because you may find that you disagree with yourself depending on which page of your notebook you're looking at. I know I do. I can disagree with myself in one sentence, as some of you already know. So anyway, so Carla is our business analyst. It's regular meetings with Alice to define what success looks like for the directors. Not unusual for these people never to actually meet the users, never to talk to the users. And I would ask those of you that are in these kind of roles, have a think back. Have you done any projects where you've gone and you've talked to the business director has said, I want this, this, and this, and you've gone away and gone, okay, fine, made it and given it back to them, without actually going and asking the people who use the software whether they have any opinions on that. In terms of incentives, it's not unusual for such people, particularly in larger businesses, to have incentives that are based around relationships, that are based around quality of and accuracy of the business analysis that they're doing, and so on. So the way to get these people on board and engaged in your project is very much around these areas: relationships and perception management. Her perception will be that Alice's perceptions are more important than Ben's reality, which is a serious consideration. By the way, some of these subtitles that are coming out, if you're following the subtitles, are completely random, and it's not my fault. They're being generated by AI in PowerPoint. I didn't pre-write this. So yeah, it's very perception driven, and also these vague incentives that are sometimes unhelpful when you come to the testing stage. So again, this is all to do with individual positions within the project will end up potentially damaging your testing at the end. Now, I warn you, what's about to follow is a coda, and I suspect this may be a representation of a number of people on this Zoom. It's a coda, and it's a massive stereotype. So just brace yourself for the stereotype. Here's our coda man. Here he is in a dark room with a hoodie. This is Daniel, the developer, in the dark room with the hoodie. Talks to Carla quite a lot, is completely unaware of the existence of Ben, and also doesn't talk to Alice directly. So everything that Daniel is getting in terms of requirements is coming filtered through the business analyst. Now that is as it should be, but bear it in mind, if your business analyst isn't mapping things correctly, poor old Daniel has no hope of actually delivering what's required. His emotional position commonly, and I appreciate his position is the position that many of you are in, but commonly frustrated at people expecting miracles, but also priding himself on his ability to actually achieve those miracles and pull a rabbit out of a hat. I've been Daniel. I've also been Carla. There's an interesting sentence. So I completely get that kind of pulling a miracle out of a hat, those little moments, sparks of genius. That's where Daniel is motivated. That's what his emotions are all about. Again, his perception is going to be that Alice's perceptions are more important than Ben's reality. But he's going to be sometimes, I know this is a controversial one, but sometimes defensive of code, and commonly, absolutely commonly, wrong incentives. And the number of times I have seen developers with incentives, like, particularly in larger companies, where people are paid bonuses on the number of bugs they fix, but that is on code that they themselves produced. And if you think about the incentives that produces, what that means is that they are actually incentivized to produce bad code in the first place in order to get the bonus for fixing it later. And that is another big issue in testing, I find. And then we have our project manager, the lovely Eve. So Eve, Eve's incentives are all going to be around timely delivery of the project and savings relative to budget. Project managers typically are all about process and order, and one thing coming after the other in a structured way, which those of you that have ever tried to introduce a Prince 2 project manager to the world of Scrum will know what I'm talking about here. That can be a very difficult transition for these people. And that insistence on testing at the end, and we're going to come on to that, but testing at the end. We've done all the things, now we're going to test it, and then we're going to sign it off into production. You go, well, hang on, there has to be some response to the testing before we sign off. But again, commonly, there won't be, because that process, that linear process, waterfall type approach, and B, incentives which are based on time and budget, not quality. So I'm partly talking to any senior people in the room, the virtual room. Think about how you're setting up those incentives. All about process, order, stakeholder management, and as I say, very unlikely to have a quality incentive. So we've got all of this set up, as I say, deliberately sort of the worst possible project team that you could imagine. Having set all of that up, what is the result? Well, The result is going to be, hang on, I'm skipping to later in my deck. No, not, sorry. Yes, this is the result. The result is going to be, you've got young Ben testing software that he doesn't want, which is based on code that doesn't work, written to a specification that doesn't reflect reality, for a project manager who doesn't care, delivering something to satisfy a director who doesn't understand it anyway. Now, that is, as I say, deliberately the worst possible case. But I have seen all of those scenarios, and all of them impact on testing. Now, that's a sort of little narrative structure to bear in mind. This is commonly the order that these events happen. Now, park all of that personality stuff. The personality stuff does play into it massively, because you've got considerations of egos and user requirements that are people get emotionally attached to, that don't actually add any value to the business, for example. So Ben's like, I work around it like this. Why do you work around it like that, Ben? I always do, and I'm not willing to let go of it for this project. Those kind of conversations, that will damage your testing later, especially if you then give him a solution to the thing that he says he doesn't want changed. When he then comes to test it, he's got an emotional incentive, if not a financial one, to make that testing fail. This is commonly the order we do this. So we do the business requirements piece up the top. We go to our business, our stakeholders, our directors, and we say, what do you want? And they say, I want a widget that does X, Y, and Z. And we say, okay, fine. Then we go straight into business analysis. I'm going to talk about that in a little bit as well, but we go straight into the business analysis about defining those requirements in terms of process outcomes and business outcomes. Then maybe, and I nearly put this sort of in a half visible box, but maybe we do user requirements. And by user requirements, I'm talking about things like considerations of accessibility, or understanding, for example, no, this bit of the process and this bit of the process need to be on the screen, on the same screen, because X, Y, Z. Simple usability type requirements like that. Also, potentially things like performance requirements, if you can consider them, availability, and so on, which are unlikely to have been considered. Availability may be considered at the top, but performance is very much a user level requirement, and if it's not captured here, your non-functional requirements, you're not going to be able to test it later. So having gathered that, we produce a functional spec, which goes off to a coder, or is produced by the coder, or what have you. Anyway, we produce a functional spec, then we produce some code. Then, well, actually then often that's the end of the project. Thank you very much. And they say, look, I've produced all your code, I've bundled it up, I've packaged it, I've deployed it out to your business. Bye. And that is often the end of the process. We probably unit tested it. I will doff my cap to the coders in the room. I'm sure it's been unit tested and all that sort of stuff, and debugged in that respect. But end user testing is often overlooked because it's expensive and it's seen as an impediment to getting the project signed off. And getting the project signed off, if you're in a outsourced service provider or you're a freelancer or what have you, that's the thing that gets your invoice paid. So there's a lot of pressure to skip it. And my point here is don't. So anyway, so we produce the code, and then from there we produce some test scripts. And actually, this is built to serve the emotional and the perspective and the incentives of all those roles that I talked about earlier. This is commonly how that kind of waterfall works. And even people who say they're in Scrum projects, there's still fundamentally this waterfall happens. You can't start your Scrum until you've done at least the first two of these boxes. And you could argue that you know, the last two boxes sort of happen in a loop at the end. You're still roughly coming along this waterfall. Forgot where that sentence was going. So yes, this is built to sort of meet the egos, the emotions, the incentives that we've talked about, and that's why I talk about them in such length. Now, I think fundamentally this is in the wrong order, and I'm going to suggest, with some cheesy animation, that they should be in this order. So firstly, user requirements and business analysis. It should be user requirement led, not business analysis led. Gather those user requirements first, then do the business analysis, because it gives you a comparison point. So say, okay, so what do you do now? That's the first question. What do you do now? Tell me what happens now, then tell me the business requirements, or then I will refer those back to the business requirements rather, and then we can produce the business analysis that will move us forwards. Now, test scripts, in my view, come after business analysis and before code, and this is the bit that I think is possibly the most controversial, and I've often fought to get this into projects. Write your test scripts. I'm talking directly to the coders now. Write your test scripts before you write your code. If you already do that, I congratulate you and pat you warmly on the back. I don't know a lot of people who do. Write the test scripts before you produce your code. Write your test scripts before you produce your functional spec. So you're starting out in a kind of Scrum story type approach, you know, as a I want, so that, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. But start from the end. So say to yourself, when we come to test, what are we going to test? We are going to test X, Y, Z. Right, therefore, I need this in my functional spec. Therefore, I'm going to write that code. What we tend to do, what lots of projects tend to do, and the reason we have a problem with testing, and ultimately, if we wanted to boil this down to one reason why testing fails, it is because we write test scripts to test the code we have written. And that is not going to work. Or, well, actually, more from a testing perspective, it's not going to work. Actually, but from a project perspective, it's going to work brilliantly. It's going to be absolutely fabulous because you are testing the stuff that you know already works because you've coded for it. So what I'm saying is write your test scripts first. That is fundamentally the reason why testing doesn't work. And what I mean by doesn't work is doesn't deliver value to the project, doesn't deliver value to the business. We have a structure which is set up to deliver, to manage people's emotions and perspectives and incentives, but it doesn't actually add any value because essentially you end up with people marking their own homework. We also tend to do the testing in the wrong place. We don't get the end users to do the testing. Always, I've seen this one so many times. Your testing and your sign off should be based on simple yes/no statements. I saw one, I won't name the company for obvious reasons, but I saw one where the test was full of languages like it should, and the plan is to, that was literally in the test script, the plan is to make this so that. Okay, that's not a test statement. Can't do anything really with that. So rather, and this particular one was to do with recalculating foreign exchange values. So it was when we put a value into here, it should connect to a foreign exchange service and should, but well, okay, we can all agree that it should. Question is, does it? That's what the test question is. So when value entered in box A, box B value updates to yes or no. You know, really be hard on that. That's how you want to put your test scripts together, and you want to do them here before you've written your functional spec, because what you're saying is, what does the user want to happen? What is the user going to expect to happen? Okay, fine. If the user's expecting the value in box B to reflect the current market value of £1, but in US dollars, your functional spec can then describe that and can then work back how you're going to do that functionally. with the previous model, as I said, going back a little bit, if I may, we tend to write it there, and actually commonly in the same language. And what that means is that the coder is getting something quite vague and quite difficult to assess. If you do it this way round, you can say, well, that's what the user is going to be testing. Therefore, right, I know I'm going to need to use, I don't know, the xe.com API, and you can start to build in much more detail in your functional spec, which makes it much easier for your code to be produced to hit that spec. And testing that happens at the end is also much easier. But there is a key point before we get there, which is to get the user and the executive to sign, which may be the same person, see previous comment, but to get that signed off again at that stage. Say, okay, right, I have listened to everything you've said. I have written down all my requirements and done all my analysis and drawn all my diagrams and all that stuff. And these are the things we're going to test at the end. Do you like that? Yes or no? A couple of really important reasons for that. Firstly, it forces some ownership. Actually, there's more than a couple. Never enumerate a list before you start saying it. So first, it drives some ownership. Secondly, it's an opportunity for you to go, oh, hang on, we forgot. And it just gets that conversation going again. Lastly, to the freelancers and the outsourced agency developers in the room, makes it much harder for the customer to refuse to pay for it later. If they say, well, hang on, you said this was what we were going to test. We've tested it. It works. Here's my bill. So, yes, get your sign off there. And then, as I say, create the functional spec to deliver the test requirements rather than purely based on the business analysis. And then do your testing. And as in good Scrum, this is essentially Scrum methodology, test and go back. It's not uncommon to test and then go, oh yeah, it doesn't quite work, but that's sort of all right. It doesn't really matter, does it? I would say, yes, it does. Enforce some discipline on yourself. Always go back. So the reason that your testing is not working, and I don't mean to over-personalize that. I'm sure your testing is working because you're all high quality individuals doing great work. The reason that testing often doesn't work in projects is because the testing is often done by the people who are producing the code. That they have an emotional and a financial incentive in specific outcomes, and they will make sure that they happen. The people at the top who are paying for the product are too detached from the reality of working working with it. The people who work with it are probably going to be resistant to the change and are going to make the testing as hard as possible. And the point in the process where the testing was defined as to what was going to be tested and how and by whom and all those kind of things is too late, so you end up testing your own homework. And that is everything I have to say about testing, and I think that has taken me about 25 minutes or 20 minutes, so it's really difficult with everybody on mute because I feel like I'm talking into a black hole, but that's me done.
Hey.
I don't know whether that was any use or not. If not, I'll go away. If it wasn't any use, pretend you haven't seen it.
I'll just stop the camera there, shall I? Oh, it's great. Thank you. Oh, hang on. Why? I'm on gallery view. That's why. There we go. Thank you. Does anyone have any questions? I don't know if you've seen the chat, but there's a massive conversation going on. But I don't know if you've actually got any questions.
It's a positive conversation.
So Nick, this is obviously very much a waterfall approach to doing software development. You know, there's the idea of doing agile or DevOps is more about customer outcomes, where actually the whole of the team is not actually doing testing; it's actually building experiments and working through those experiments. I guess that's the big difference between what you're describing and what perhaps DevOps, Lean, and Agile is trying to present.
Yeah, so I agree with you. As always, Glenn, I agree with you. But what the qualifier I would put on that is I think people are a lot more waterfall than they're willing to admit. I think there are lots of people who will tell you they're doing DevOps and they'll tell you they're doing Agile, and they're not. My favourite example of that, by the way, was a project manager that I worked with up in the city, who actually was in my mind when I was saying earlier about the effort of dragging these people. Somebody who said, yes, we're going to work in a very agile DevOps way once we've got a fully defined user requirement. Right? Okay, do you want to think that sentence through a little bit? So, yes, I agree with you. If I thought that everybody who says they were doing DevOps was doing DevOps, I wouldn't need to do this talk. But unfortunately, I don't think they are. I think a lot of them are waterfall, really.
No, I agree. I totally agree. And I think like doing testing up front, or writing test scripts up front, it does actually help you understand what your requirements are. So it does actually provide that little feedback loop in the middle there before you've even written a line of code. Yeah. Once you've written code, it's the cost of changing it is increased. So, you know, it is about testing your theories before you even write your code. And you know, what you're saying is shifting that whole, you know, defining your test cases further left is what you're meant to be doing. And I totally agree with that. And it does fit in with the waterfall way.
So, yeah, I think what I'm trying to do is sneak a bit of DevOps type thinking into people who can't quite let go of the waterfall, as it were. Now I've got an image of somebody trying to hold a waterfall, which doesn't really work, does it? But you know what I mean.
It's all about Conway's law, isn't it? Because you described 5 characters there in a very structured organizational chart, and therefore your application development is also part of that organization structure. So that's what Conway's law is, isn't it? So that's what's happening. So and people are very reluctant to give up their roles, especially at the senior levels, and therefore you have you end up with application software development that very much mimics your organizational structure.
Yeah, you do, and I think also I made the point a few times that quite often those roles will overlap in reality, particularly in the SME market. You know, where you're going to have I'm in the business I work for, there's 30 people in the business, 32 people, something like that. You know, I do this in there, and I probably am, in terms of some of our internal stuff, I am the project manager and the business analyst and often the coder, and probably I'm the tester as well, going back to the director and saying, yeah, I've done that and it worked and it was great. Can I have a pat on the back, please? And because I am, as some people looking know, I am a bit of a whore for a pat on the back. So you have to be really careful of those structures, because people, as I say, people will respond to their incentives. If every project manager I've ever worked with has incentives that say, get it done on time and get it done on budget. Don't really give a damn if it works. That's operations problem, you know. So yes, that is exactly the organisational structure problem. That's somebody else's problem, making it work after it's gone live. My job is simply to get the paperwork arranged in such a way that we can say this project is finished, and that ultimately is what will break these things.
Cool, I agree.
Anything else?
Anyone else? No, I was quite enjoying that, to be honest. Oh, you should have a look at the chat later. It's like loads of. You started an entire conversation. It was amazing.
Right, good. I'm glad to see you.
I think that's the longest conversation we've had through a Code Harbour, actually.
So that's either I triggered lots of thoughts, or people weren't listening and were having a chat instead.
No, I think, yeah, it definitely triggered some interesting conversations. So, yeah, I think that's us done for this part then. Thank you, Nick.
Thank you.
I'm going to get a clap track, I think. All right. We will pause it for now, and we'll start back 15. I forgot you could do that. Yes, start back in about 15, 20 minutes. Is that right with everyone?
Yep.
Cool. All right. Cool.